What's up, third service people? How are you? Everybody good? Everybody good? Great to have you here. I'm Barry. I'm one of the ministers here at Creekside. And if this is your first time, welcome. Also, if you're joining us online, great to have you with us as well. Do you ever get tired of eating the same things over and over? I know you might be sitting next to your wife or whatever, and that might be a little awkward, but I think we all do, right? At one time when I was like, I think I'd just like to try something different. Well, a couple of weeks ago, Lori said to me, she said, I'm going to the grocery store. Do you need anything or do you want anything different? And I said, no, I think I'm good. And then a couple of days later, I was like, you know what would be really good? Could you maybe make some enchiladas? Like, I'm a big fan of Mexican food. And she said, sure, I'd be glad to. And so she goes, if you'll stop and pick up the ingredients, if you'll stop by the store, get the stuff, I'll make them. And so she sent me she didn't send me the list of ingredients. She sent me a picture of the ingredients. And there wasn't any amounts on them. So I bought the 4-cup thing of cheese and all this kind of stuff. I bought corn tortillas. I bought, enchilada sauce. I bought a lot of stuff. I ended up spending $30 just to have enchiladas. And she fixed them and I ate them and they were good. And she goes, how did you like them? And I said, they were good. And she goes, well, I have some dietary restrictions, guys. I don't eat seeds. And so she goes, it took me a while to put them together because I had to cook the chicken, and then I had to de-seed all the green chilies, which is mostly seeds. I had to de-seed the salsa, so it took me a little while. And I said, well, it was $30, just for enchiladas. And she said, well, for $30, why don't you just go to Taco Bell next time? And I said, for $30, I can go to Taco Bell 3 times, so I'll just go to Taco Bell, right? There's times when we say, I just want something different. And there's nothing wrong with wanting something different for dinner. There's nothing wrong when it's I want something different, when it comes to food, or maybe you want to replace something I've had this shirt forever, it's clothes, or maybe you go, I want to replace furniture, replacing things. We're basically told by our culture, when you get tired of something, just replace it, right? No big deal, just replace it. Grow tired of something, just replace it. Well, that works for things like food and phones and furniture. That doesn't work for people. And a lot of times what we live in this culture that treats people like things. And so when you're ready to be done with them, just be done with them, right? Maybe they've done something to disappoint you. Maybe you've kind of grown tired of their friendship. Maybe you're going through something difficult. Maybe there's a lot of different things that have happened, but it's different when it's people. People aren't disposable. And the problem is sometimes maybe we've been the ones who've disposed of somebody else, and sometimes we've been the one who was the victim of that. Somebody's done something to hurt us or make us feel like you're not worth my friendship or you're not worth the relationship. And sometimes when people hurt us, what happens is a lot of different things. We can start blaming ourselves. We can be entrapped by those feelings. We can sometimes think that, maybe we're the victim. We can sometimes feel like relationships are just too risky. We can feel like if somebody's really hurt us deeply and kind of disposed of us and moved on from us, feel like maybe I should just get revenge. There are there's 1,000 different responses to being hurt, for people saying things or doing things to us that hurt us. But over and over again in God's word, what we see are powerful stories of reconciliation. A couple of weeks ago, we began a new message series called Built for More. And during this series, the focus has been on how we are built for relationships. And we are looking at one of my favorite men in the Bible. We're going to be looking at a great story in the Bible. It's the story of Joseph. And as we look at this story, we can see that people get hurt by relationships. We see that we are still built for relationships, no matter what's happened. So Joseph's story starts in Genesis 37. It's actually 13 chapters, and we're not going to dive deeply into all 13 chapters, but we're going to start with verse 37. And Joseph is a teenager, maybe about 17 years old. And Joseph has 10 older half-brothers. 10 older half-brothers, and he's got one full brother who is younger than him, Benjamin. So it's a big family. It's a blended family, and all the brothers have the same father, Jacob, but they have different moms. So Jacob, the dad, did something he shouldn't have done. He made Joseph and gave Joseph this ornamental, snazzy, fancy robe. And Joseph wore this robe proudly. None of the other brothers got a fancy, snazzy, ornamental robe. It's like they were all wearing hand-me-downs from Tractor Supply. Now, I've been to Tractor Supply. Don't write me, don't email me. I've bought stuff from Tractor Supply. But it's different like when you're wearing a richly ornamented robe and you're wearing hand-me-downs. And it was more than an ornamental robe. It was Jacob saying to everybody, Joseph is my favorite son. And Genesis 37:4 says, his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. And they couldn't say a kind word to him. They hated him. And then it got worse because Joseph started telling them his dreams. In one dream, he said they were building these sheaves of grain. And he said to his brothers, your sheaves of grain bowed down to mine. And they're like, what do you mean? You think we're going to worship you or something? And then Joseph told another story. In another dream he had, there was the sun and moon and 11 stars, and they all bowed down to him. And this even got his father fired up at him. And he said, are you telling me that me and your mother and your 11 brothers are going to bow down and worship you? And his brothers just became furious with him. Well, later on, his brothers were out tending their flocks of sheep, and they were some distance away from home. And Jacob said to Joseph, why don't you go find your brothers, see how they're doing? And it says, as he approached them, he finally found out where they were. As they approached him, Genesis 37, verses 19 and 20 say, they saw him from a distance and began plotting to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns, or like a well. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. It's crazy. But when Joseph gets there, they beat him up, they strip off that ornamented robe, and they throw him in a well. And Genesis later reveals that Joseph, during this whole time, during this beating he was receiving, pleaded with them in anguish. But it says they refused to listen. And what do you do after you beat your brother up and throw him in a well? You have something to eat. Brothers sit down and start having a meal. And as they're eating, a caravan of merchants approached, and one of the brothers, Judah, suggested instead of killing Joseph, let's sell him to the merchants. And Genesis 37:28 says they pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. The oldest or the youngest brother, Benjamin, wasn't there, so it's just the older 10 brothers, and they sold him for 20 pieces of silver, which is about $47.50 each. And they said, we're done with you, Joseph. Our lives would be better without you. We're done with you. Enjoy your life as a slave. And then the merchants took him to Egypt, where it says they sold him to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Now, I don't know about you. Most of you all had brothers and sisters, right? You got some stories you could tell, right? I grew up as an only child, so I don't have some of the same stories that you have. I mean, I would go see my friends. I'd go over to their house, and they'd be yelling at each other and fighting and screaming and actually, fighting. I'd go home, and it was quiet. It was different. It was a different kind of childhood. But maybe you grew up with brothers and sisters. And one of the hardest things for me when our kids were little, and we've got 3 kids, they're like adults now, 32-year-old son, 29-year-old son, 23-year-old daughter. When my kids were little and they started fighting, it really bothered me. It really bothered me because I hated to see my kids fight. And you might have had brothers and sisters, but even seeing your own kids fight really got to you, and maybe you understood it. But it was really, really hard for me. So this week I decided to email them, or I texted them and I said, hey, I'm glad none of y'all were thrown into a well by your brothers or sisters, but do you have any great stories you could share with me about how you mistreated one another? And I'll tell you what, if you send them that message, they will respond. They responded with a number of stories. And I'm not going to share them all because I can't. I probably shouldn't, but I'll share one with you. My young daughter used to be tormented by her older brother, who's 9 years older. And she said, once Austin told me that there were land sharks in the lake behind our house. Now, I don't know if y'all know this, land sharks aren't real, but he told her that there were land sharks in the lake and that they, at night, would get up out of the lake and they would grow legs and they would go around, and because they were nocturnal, they would walk around at night and they only ate little girls. She was 5 and she was terrified. See, pastors' families aren't any different than your families. The things that happen in yours happen in mine. But sometimes brothers and sisters, siblings can be cruel to each other. And Joseph's brothers took it to a whole new level. And when we see this first part of Joseph's story, we see that he experienced the trauma and suffering of being rejected and abandoned by the people he loved and trusted the most. His own family, his own brothers. For some of us, maybe it was family, maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was when you were a kid, maybe it was when you were a teenager, maybe it was when you were in college, could have been an adult, could have been somebody from your family, could have been someone from work, could have been someone from church. But I think at one time or another, we've all felt hurt because of what people have done or said about us. When I was 19 years old, I took my first part-time student ministry at a small church just about 45 minutes north of Cincinnati, Ohio, in Hamilton, Ohio. And so I was just a weekend minister, and it was a small church. I don't know, 80 people, 100 people, only a handful of kids, weekend ministry. Went to school during the week, weekend ministry and weekend. And I came from a really big church, a pretty big church, and this was a very small church. And there was a church building, and then there was a house on the same property. And in the house was where all the children's ministry classes were, where students were, all that kind of stuff. And so it's a Sunday morning. I'm there early. I'm going to be teaching the junior high class. So I'm on the second floor in the class, working through my lesson. And I hear the door downstairs open. So it's just me in there. And these 2 older women walk in, and they're getting ready for their class, and they begin chatting. And then they start talking about things at the church, and then they started talking about me. Now, I'll tell you 2 things. In an old church house, number 1, the walls are thin, and the acoustics are fabulous. And there you can hear everything that goes on, anything anybody says. And they started talking about me, and some of the things were funny. Like, to me, it's like, okay, come on. But some of them were just mean. I mean, it was like gossip. I'm sitting here listening to people gossip about me and talk about me. So at 19 years old, I received my first ministry review. My first performance review was completely free. It was brutally honest and delivered by 2 old women who I'm sure are dead now, but that's okay. Fortunately, I'm not bitter. I imagine one day I'm going to get to heaven, I'm going to say these, hey, do you remember that time? They're going, well, no, we don't remember that at all. But anyway, it was something different. So I hope you hear what I'm going to say. I really do hope you're going to hear this. You are not less than because of what anybody has said about you or done to you. You're not. You are not less than because of how people have treated you. You are not less than because of trauma or suffering. You are not less than because someone has rejected you. You're just not. That doesn't mean, despite those things, that God is done with you. It doesn't. You're valuable in His sight. After the trauma Joseph endured from his brothers, God wasn't done with him. They sell him for 20 pieces of silver. The merchants take him to Egypt, and there in Egypt he's sold to a man named Potiphar, who is the captain of the Pharaoh's guard. Pharaoh's the king of Egypt. Potiphar is one of his most trusted right-hand men. And so Joseph is sold to Potiphar. And Genesis 39:2 says, the Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. Despite his difficult past, Joseph experienced success. There can be success after suffering. Potiphar recognized Joseph's leadership abilities, and he put him in charge over his entire household, which would have worked great. Unfortunately, Mrs. Potiphar repeatedly attempted to seduce him. Mrs. Potiphar would have been perfect starring in The Real Housewives of Cairo. She'd have been perfect for that. There's a part where she's continuing to press into Joseph and try to talk him into sleep with her, but he refuses her advances, saying, Genesis 39:9, how then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? You know, he wasn't thinking, man, I've been through so much that this maybe is a good idea. I don't know. No, he said, how could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God? And one day, after grabbing his cloak and asking him to sleep with her, he left his cloak, he left his robe in her grasp, and he ran. And he decided it was better to lose another robe than to lose his character. And she then falsely accused him of attacking her, and Potiphar had Joseph thrown into prison. Once again, he's suffering for something he didn't do. Yet, Genesis 39:21 says, the Lord was with him, and he showed him kindness. And because of Joseph's leadership skills, Joseph was put in charge of all the other prisoners by the warden. When he was in prison, Joseph correctly interpreted 2 dreams because he was the dreamer, right? God gave him the ability to understand dreams. So through Joseph, God correctly interpreted 2 dreams. There was the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. Both were very important to Pharaoh. And Joseph said to the chief cupbearer, he said, look, you're going to get back in your position. You're going to be released. And when you get back and when you're serving in the court again, remember me. Tell them that I've been here and I've been falsely accused so I can get out of this place. But Genesis 40:23 says the chief cupbearer forgot him. 2 years later, Pharaoh is having disturbing dreams. And Pharaoh can't find anybody to interpret his dreams. And the cupbearer said, oh yeah, I remember there's this guy in prison named Joseph. Let's go get Joseph. Maybe Joseph can interpret your dreams. And sure enough, Pharaoh tells him the dreams, and Joseph, through God's help, interprets the dream. He says, Pharaoh, there's going to be 7 years of abundance. Like our crops are going to grow like crazy. And then that's going to be followed by 7 years of famine. And then in Genesis 41, Joseph proposed a plan for storing up grain for those times when there's famine. And impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh declares in Genesis 41:38, can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God? And then Pharaoh then placed Joseph in charge of Egypt and announced, only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. Wait, what? I mean, despite being rejected and abandoned by the people who he loved and valued the most, his own family, that did not define Joseph's future. By 30, when a lot of people still might be trying to figure out what their career is going to look like, Joseph has gone from a beaten up brother to a slave to a prisoner to vice president of Egypt. And do you think, a couple of crazy thoughts. Do you think that the people of Egypt, not Israel, that the people of Egypt even understood when they saw Joseph what he had been through? They probably saw this 30-year-old guy who had this meteoric rise to the vice president of Egypt, and they thought, wow, his life is great, not realizing all the suffering he had been through. The truth is that very few people see the suffering that oftentimes successful people go through. There is never success without suffering. But listen to this. Please listen to this. Success isn't the solution to suffering either. If you've been through a lot and you're thinking, if I could just become successful, then it'll make all that go away. Doesn't work that way. A lot of you have learned that. I also wondered why, and the Bible never tells us why, now that Joseph is second in command over all of Egypt, why doesn't he go back to his homeland? Why did he roll up in like a gold shiny chariot surrounded by all the officials and like an army of people. And I also imagine like Toby Keith's music playing in the background. How do you like me now? And just going back home and seeing, what are they going to do now? They threw me in the well and here I am. What do you think about that? But we know why. We know why. Because he'd have to face his brothers. And he had spent years trying to distance himself from his suffering through his success. And he'd been fairly good at that. He also named one of his sons, because he had moved to Egypt and he'd gotten married and he had kids. He named one of his sons Manasseh, which means, God has made me forget all my hardship and my father's household. He named his son Manasseh. But let's be honest. He didn't forget. He couldn't forget. He might have tried to suppress it, but later on you see the emotion coming out. He couldn't forget. Let me encourage you, if you've been hurt by others and are suffering, let me encourage you. Being hurt by others didn't take away anything that God has given you. Like God has given you life, God has given you a mind. God has given you unique abilities that very few people have. Maybe you're musically talented. Maybe you are a leader. Maybe you are good at math. Maybe you're good at problem solving. Maybe you are good at communication. Maybe God has given you a heart for other people. You are sensitive in a way that not everybody can be. God maybe gave you the gift of intuition. Maybe God gave you the ability to manage money well. The list is endless. Being hurt by others and suffering does not take away anything that God has given you. Being hurt isn't the end of your story. And success isn't the end of your story either. It wasn't the end of Joseph's. Joseph's story doesn't end with suffering. It doesn't end with success. It kind of resolves itself. It ends when there's reconciliation with his brothers. Years after selling Joseph into slavery, the famine comes and it's affecting everybody in the region. And Joseph's family is suffering. They're starving to death. And so Jacob says to the brothers, the 10 older brothers, hey, go down to Egypt. They've got food there and get some food for us. Well, they get to Egypt and they are led to the office of the man who is in charge of the storage and distribution of food. Well, who is that? They're led to the office of their brother Joseph. But they don't know that. And they are dressed in their Hebrew garb, their robes. Maybe they're carrying walking sticks and they got long beard and their hair hasn't been cut. And they walk into the office of this man who is clean shaven. He looks like an Egyptian. He is dressed like an Egyptian. He's speaking Egyptian. They don't know it's Joseph. But Joseph immediately recognizes them. But he conceals his identity. He doesn't tell them who it is right away. He wants to test to see if they are changed. Joseph accused them of being spies. He knew they weren't spies, but he accused them of being spies. And when they talked about the younger brother Benjamin that was back home, Joseph said, so that I can know you're telling me the truth, go get Benjamin and bring him back here. They didn't want to do that. They didn't want to do that, but they went and they got Benjamin. They brought Benjamin back. And then Joseph arranged for there to be a dinner. And after the dinner, they were heading back home, and Joseph had somebody stick his silver cup that belonged to him in Benjamin's bag, as if Benjamin had taken it. And then he brought them all back, and he accused them of stealing from him. They said, we didn't do it. And he said, if anybody's stolen, they're going to stay here. They're going to be my prisoner forever. And they found the cup, the silver cup, in Benjamin's bag. And it was Judah who stepped forward. Listen, Judah stepped forward and said, don't do that to him. Let me take his place. Finally, now that Joseph had seen that they had been changed, he sent everyone else away and he wept loudly, and he told his brothers a very dramatic scene. He said, I am Joseph. And then he says, is your father still living? Is my father still living? And it says, the brothers were terrified, as you could imagine. But rather than seeking revenge, Joseph reassured them. He said, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. And Joseph embraced Benjamin and he kissed all his brothers as they wept together. He couldn't forget. He couldn't forget. All that emotion came right back up. And years later, after their father Jacob died, their brothers began to worry that Joseph would seek revenge. But Joseph again responded, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Joseph was never less than because of his suffering. He was never more than because of his success. His story is resolved when there is reconciliation between he and his brothers. But let me warn you. Let me just warn you about something. I'm not suggesting that you immediately go to anyone who has wronged you and seek reconciliation. It's just a warning. Joseph didn't do that. He didn't immediately reveal himself. He wanted to make sure that his brothers were changed, that they had made a turn. He didn't immediately reveal himself and seek reconciliation. He wanted to make sure they were changed. And there may be people who have hurt you who haven't changed. And sometimes it's okay for people who have hurt you to kind of stay out of your life. I'm not saying you got to let everybody back in. We're not saying that. Joseph tested them to see if they had changed. Now, maybe if you've done something, maybe you know to go to somebody and reconcile. But if somebody's hurt you, just be wise, be discerning. Couple of things for us to take away from Joseph's story. First thing is this. God can take the bad things that happen to us and he can use them for good. Now, sometimes God doesn't just use the bad for the good. He intends to use the bad things for good. Now, there's a difference. It's not like God sometimes says, yeah, you've been through something bad. I'm going to find something good out of that. We're not saying that. Sometimes God intends the bad to be used for good. Years ago, when I was growing up, a popular Christian author and speaker was Joni Eareckson Tada. And Joni was a Christian author. She was a speaker, but she was in a diving accident when she was a kid, and she became a quadriplegic. And she really wrestled with why God would allow that to happen to her. And her friend Steve Estes said to her, God permits what he hates to accomplish what he loves. And maybe that's what God is doing with you. Something that God can't stand, he's going to use it for good. Or it's meant to be used for good. God doesn't merely find something good after sometimes bad things happen. He uses them for good. And whatever you're going through, God can use that. And God will use that if you let him for good. And the second thing we can take away from Joseph's story is this. We are built more than for suffering. We're built more than just for success. We are built for relationships. We're built for community. And I don't know what's happened before with you and other people, but sometimes it creates this sideways energy kind of thing, relationship stuff. Even when relationships aren't perfect, God can bring them together again when we choose to see that God's hand is in all things and when we can forgive. And at Creekside, we're glad you're part of this church. We want to be your church family. We want to be your church home. A lot of you have moved from other places, and maybe you've moved here because the kids or grandkids are here or whatever. Maybe there's nobody else here. You're here, everybody else is somewhere else. I don't know. We want to be your church family. And we don't want you to make this your church family because we're hoping you're a perfect person. Because we're not perfect either. The church isn't filled with perfect people. It's filled with people who've got a background and a story. But we come together because we're built for relationships. It's where forgiven people learn to live like family. So we're glad you're here. But let me go a little deeper in Joseph's story. This is where it gets really fascinating. God wasn't just bringing Joseph and his brothers back together. God wasn't just reconciling that relationship. God was moving in a family that he would one day use to change the world. Remember Judah? Remember Judah who said, let's not kill him, let's throw him into a well. And then when Joseph threatened to keep Benjamin and throw him to prison, Judah said, no, take my life, take me instead of him. Joseph said, take me instead, let Benjamin go free. That's what Judah did. Generations later, it was a descendant of Judah, Jesus, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, who offered not to be a slave in our place, but offered to give his life in our place. Jesus said, take me instead. Let them go free. That's what Jesus said. And so when we come together and we have communion, it's a time when we remember the body and blood that Jesus gave as a sacrifice on the cross so that we could be forgiven and find freedom in Jesus. That's the story that's really behind the story of Joseph. God was going to use Joseph's story, Joseph's family. God was going to use Judah and Judah's descendants. God was going to use Jesus to step in and take our place. Judah's offer points to the heart of the gospel. The innocent one, Jesus, took the place of the guilty, you and me. And through him, we have freedom. As we take communion, it's going to be a time where it's just between you and God. We're going to turn down the lights. It's going to be a moment to reflect. And maybe you just want to thank God for what he's done for you, for him giving his life for you. Maybe you want to admit to something you've done and seek forgiveness for something. Maybe you want to reconcile something with him. Maybe you want to pray for somebody else. Whatever that time is, this is a time for you to commune with him and to remember what he's done. So after a moment of that, after we have some space to do that, I'll come back up and pray, and then we'll close our service together.